Okay, I'm just gonna get started by saying there are a lot of crappy self-help, self-improvement type books out there. I like to read a lot, and self-help books are making their way into my rotation. They have been for a couple years now. And I also read a lot of other genres, but something about the self-help type book is really interesting to me. I always find my way back to them. You know, they're really appealing and they always promise these big, grand ideas at the end of the very next page. And often that very next page never comes and you end up reading a 200 to 400 page book over basically nothing. Books are not a small time commitment, and especially in the self-improvement thing, they often can be pretty wordy and pretty large books that take time to read. And the worst feeling is when you close a book and you felt like you gained nothing from it. So what I'm going to give you today are 4 self-improvement books that are actually going to be worth your time. There's a decent amount of variety between these 4 books, and I'm pretty sure you have not heard of some of them, so make sure you're staying to listen to what all these 4 books are. But I want to explain a little bit of why I think I don't like some self-improvement books and why a lot of people give self-improvement books a bad rap. And getting right into it, I think it starts with their use of pseudoscience when they're writing a book. And essentially the pseudoscience that's used in a lot of these self-help books is these great ideas on paper that they then try and back it up with very little scientific evidence, and often they're taking studies out of context of what they actually mean, and you have a bunch of different authors drawing a bunch of different conclusions off of one small sample size study, but then they write it in their book as if it's fact and if this is the only way to do it, and they try and narrow down in on as if their philosophy and what they take from their one research article and their one piece of pseudoscience is the end-all be-all for how someone can improve in whatever area of life that this book happens to be about. Looking at self-improvement books in general, I think there always is a small element of pseudoscience, and when this is done in the right way versus the wrong way, it can make all the difference on how a book is presented and how it's perceived by the audience that reads it. So I find that the best quality self-help books are based on well-researched topics inside of behavioral science and psychology. While good self-help books can have a tendency to reduce these scientific concepts into something more digestible for readers like you and me, they tend to do it in a way that actually makes sense and the concept is still intact, and what the large scientific evidence is still supports the claim they're making. Where if you were to do bad pseudoscience research, I feel like you're often taking the research a little bit too far. You're simplifying it too much from what that study draws on, almost to the point where you're just talking about fantasy and fiction and opinion, but you're selling it off as if it's fact and all these scientists agree on it, when that's almost never the case. I often find that they take massive liberties with using this advanced sounding terminology that almost it makes them be perceived as more credible, but I feel like they have nothing to say when you finish the book. There's just no point in what you just read. And I also think the quality of research that they look at is very hand selected, and they exhibit a lot of cherry picking in the studies that they talk about. And I'm not going to talk about any specifics because honestly, I would argue that the majority of self-help books fall into the pseudoscience trap. And then kind of going off of the use of their scientific terminology, I feel like a lot of self-help books are overwritten. There are simply too many words. It's like they're trying to hit a word count, and I just don't understand why they add in the extra 100 to 200 pages when it feels like a book could have been done by 150 pages. And one example I want to give of this is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think the first half of that book is fairly decent and actually has some good principles and things that you can take away if you take it at pretty much face value. But then the second half of the book just reiterates the entire thing. They add the expanded edition with the extended forward, and I often feel like it just was pointless and it has way too many words. So I'm going to make sure that all the books today do not have those unnecessary words, those unnecessary examples. You don't need 5 chapters to explain your credibility about a book. I think that is pretty ridiculous, and it goes a little bit too hard into maybe you're just trying to sell books for the sake of selling books. Which brings me to my final argument here, in that some self-help books kind of feel like they're selling snake oil to you. Some self-help books I feel like fall into the area of a snake oil salesman, where these people are saying that with this one little cure, this one little step, you are instantly guaranteed millions of dollars and excessive wealth and excessive prestige and all of this stuff that is just completely unrealistic, and that feels misleading and honestly manipulative. And I understand selling an emotion and an idea is not inherently wrong, but when these books spend 400 pages on what essentially feels like garbage, I just don't understand what the purpose is besides simply selling a book to sell a book. It's like they don't actually have anything to say, but they want to act like they do. I personally feel like that genuine self-improvement comes from time and consistently and being very introspective on yourself, and I think a lot of these books discount that fact, or at least they shy away from it, and they're not totally honest with the readers that it will take time to improve on things. And in a lot of these books, I feel like there's always another course. They're constantly dropping in their websites or their other book series or their podcasts and things like that. And again, plugging is not inherently bad. I mean, I understand that, but when it's mentioned in every single chapter and it's saying if you want more detail, then you have to go to XYZ website. I think that's ridiculous, because what did I buy the book for? If the real information is behind some different paywall, like I already bought the book, what more information do you need to sell me? Things like that really hurt the credibility of a lot of self-help books when this is a massive prevalent problem in this genre of book, but they're not all like that, which is the point of what I'm about to get into. The books I'm about to tell you are ones that I have read, I have sat on for a couple months to sometimes even a year, that I really like, and I feel like that they actually have good applicable meanings and values to the average person who is more realistic about improving themselves. These books aim to provide genuine guidance and to be used as a tool rather than a means to an end for the author to make some money. Each of these books largely focuses on how you think about situations rather than what to think about situations, which I think that distinction is important because they are not giving you the guideline to success. They are giving you mindset tips and how to actually grow as a person to create your own guidelines to success. All right, book number 1 is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Unfortunately, I do not have this book with me right now because I left it before I went back to college. So bear with me on that, but as you can see, that's what the book looks like. I find this book to be honestly extremely profound, and it has a really good look at the human psychology of what your purpose is. And I don't want to get too spoilery with any of these books because this one does have a story that goes along with it. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor and also a researcher, and as a result of that, he has some very interesting commentary on humans and how they perceive happiness, and what they strive for really affects their happiness in life. This book has 2 segments to it, and it largely focuses on how people create and achieve happiness in their own personal lives. And he does this through what he claims as logotherapy. Now, I want to quickly touch on what I said just a couple minutes ago about using scientific terminology. And the difference here is that his entire life, he actually was a researcher, and this is something that he had been working on for decades before writing this book. And it's not a hard and fast rule. It's not a universal truth of life. It is simply something that he has researched among a lot of different people. He has the personal experience of surviving the Holocaust to talk about it. And I find it to be one of the few times that this is actually a well-researched argument and not just a buzzword. Logotherapy, as Frankl describes it, essentially means that true happiness and purpose in life does not come from pleasure or power, but more so from the meaning of your life and the purposes that you set yourself out to do. And his argument is essentially that even through the toughest of times, you can find meaning in your life through your work, your relationships, or even through your suffering potentially. And I think that is a really interesting concept because he doesn't shy away and explain that to be successful in life, you have to make X amount of money. He takes a completely different approach, which I find to be really nice and a complete change of pace from the rest of the self-improvement books out there, because he is not focusing on how to make $1 million overnight. He is truly looking at the human psyche and what makes a human fulfilled. The book ultimately serves as a memoir and a little bit of a tool set for how you can go through life specifically, and the only things that you can truly control are your attitude and effort to all external situations, which I think is a very powerful thing. I think it preaches resilience, purpose, and hope in a way that many other books fail to do. I think it's absolutely worth your time to read, because reading about the hardships that he went through in his life and how he overcame them really does put into perspective the struggles that you might be going through right now. And then the next book I want to talk about is a little bit of switching gears. This is one I read about 3 months ago. It's called The Magic of Thinking Big. And what I want to say about this book is that it is good. Despite what the title might look like on this, I know it does look a little bit too of like a business book, but this one is very much a mindset type of book, not in the way of intensity and grind, but kind of reframing a lot of situations in your life to be positive versus negative. Now, this book does not claim that thinking positively will bring you millions of dollars or crazy amounts of success. It is very much, again, similar to Viktor Frankl. It's about finding your purpose and happiness, which I think is what self-improvement books should truly be about, as opposed to honestly just strategies for your business or for networking and things like that, which all are great tools in their own right, but I don't think they should fall into a self-improvement category. Those definitely belong as business books. And I almost skipped over that book simply because of its cover, but the golden rule, you never judge a book by its cover. I decided to give it a read, and within the first 2 pages, I understood what the book was going to be about and explained it all in very simple language. The book does not linger on topics too long, which I feel like a lot of those books do. I think the only thing hurting this book is simply its cover. I think it just looks a little bit too gimmicky. But the book tackles a lot of self-belief, self-worth topics that I think are really important and practical in a lot of different situations. David Schwartz, the author of this book, stresses that a belief in oneself is the foundation to success in life. And not in the sense that it's just manifesting and that if you think it hard enough, it will happen, but it is more so that a solid belief in yourself over time can lead to actions that will put you in a better position to be successful by whatever that metric is. And it does definitely stress to have guided goals, very specific goals. I appreciate this book in that it has practical exercises. It doesn't just talk about you have to have these good goals and you need to be focused. It has exercises and reflection opportunities, which I think is a good indicator that the book actually has something to say for you and not something to say at you. The book also touches on concepts of fear and self-doubt, which I think are huge problems for everybody, and anybody, even if you have extremely high confidence, could gain value from at least reading what he has to say about it. And for those of you who are on the more confident side, I think that is absolutely great. And for those of you who aren't, it's action. A do-it-now mentality, I believe, is how the book describes it. It has been a couple months. I brushed up on it a little bit before this video, but I really like this book because it does preach in a way that actually makes sense and is realistic and actionable and tangible. And the final thing I want to point out about this book is that it does have really good advice for setting practical goals and improving the way you think about things. It doesn't tell you what to think, but it does tell you to think bigger, hence the title. And ultimately, I left this book feeling as though it really did have something important to say to me, that I was not upset after the near 300 pages. And at the end, they even do end with a couple anecdotes, a couple testimonies, which I know is definitely a classic legitimacy tactic for a lot of these dodgier books. But again, I've read a decent amount of books, and I feel like there is a big difference in that he left a lot of the examples until the very end, where he spent a lot of the time actually justifying what he was saying through other methods that weren't just like, oh, this guy said so, you know? He absolutely does not preach overnight success. Schwartz claims that little actions every day can lead to success, and I feel like that is extremely reasonable advice that a lot of the books in the self-improvement industry try to stay away from, because it's not as appealing and it's not as attractive as saying that you can do this in a matter of days. You know, it's just that. And I appreciate that more, and I think it adds to even more credibility on what he has to say. And, you know, I've been using some of the techniques in this book for the past couple months since I've read it, and I personally find value in it, which leads me to believe that you guys will find value in it too. I think it's worth your time to read, even just for the principle that it helps you develop a more positive mindset about whatever situation you're in life. And I think that is great and important for everyone to have, and people are lacking a lot of that these days. It's practical, it helps you set ambitious goals, and there's no wishy-washy, vague, ether or aura term that's talked about in this book. It is simply your mind and your actions, which I really appreciate. And then kind of taking a detour to a completely different type of self-improvement book. This one actually examines the way of life of an entire demographic of people, and that book is Icky Guy. This again is one that I read while I was home over the summer, so I do not have the book with me, but I really, really like this book. It was written by Hector Garcia, and it explores the way of life of what's called a blue zone in Japan. Blue zones are essentially areas in the world that have longer life expectancies, overall greater happiness, and healthier lives as a populace. And what better way to learn about being better in your own life than looking at an entire population who, by a lot of the metrics we value, are successful. And not successful in terms of wealth. Some of these people in these cities in Japan have absolutely no money at all, but they're happier than almost any of us are. Icky Guy, the title of the book, means to find your purpose and your meaning in life. A meaning that provides joy and fulfillment. And the authors argue that through finding your Icky Guy, you can live a longer and healthier life, just like the individuals in the blue zones. This book is incredibly practical, almost getting down to specific exercises in the Okinawa Prefecture, which is the village that this book mainly focuses on. And they actually interviewed some of them being centenarians, which means that they're over 100 years old. And what these centenarians had to say was wisdom that I haven't found in a lot of books. They said, honestly, it's very simple things. It's maintaining strong social connections, staying active, embracing the simpler things of life and living a simple lifestyle, and being mindful of what you say, what you do, and how you act. I'm sure you guys can tell from what I'm saying, these are not groundbreaking activities, but they are things that sometimes are overlooked in the pursuit of personal success. The book encourages readers to take small actions that create little joys and to do them every single day. They say it is often the simplest things that will bring you the most happiness and most fulfillment and ultimately lead to a longer, happier, healthier life. These Okinawans also follow the principle of never retiring. They stay active for as long as they can, and while they don't work these draining 9-to-5 jobs like a lot of people are trying to get away from reading these self-improvement books, they do stay active, whether it's in their community or with other philanthropic ventures. They do what they need to do to stay around people and be useful, and that ultimately is one of the secrets for living an extremely long and happy life. That is largely what the first half of the book focuses on, and then the second half of the book, I was not as fond of it. I still think it is very useful in that it provides specific exercises that you can do every day and specific practices. I think it's valuable, but it did feel a little bit like a bullet point list going across. But that brings up a point that I want to emphasize with any of these books and any book that you read at all from someone. It is, it might be well researched and there is facts in there. You don't have to agree with every single word that the book says. I think a lot of people go into self-help books thinking they're the gospel and they're the cure-all and they're the overnight fix, and that doesn't exist, But even with the small caveats I do have with this book, there is a reason I'm recommending it to you, and it's because that principle of finding your Icky Guy, I think it is a forthcoming journey and something that's not talked about that much, and like what you truly want to do and what truly makes you happy. And this book does tackle that head on, and it has hundreds of people that they talk to in this book that also have references for how they personally found their Icky Guy. I think it is a great book, a very short read, very easy read. So for anyone who maybe hasn't read a book in a while or is hesitant to get into too big of a self-improvement book, strongly would recommend Icky Guy for you to start at. And to round out the fourth and final book, also the one I finished most recently, was Originals by Adam Grant. I really like Originals, and I think that it serves as a great book for anyone who wants to do anything a little bit unorthodox, anything entrepreneurial, really to find and pave your own way. I think this book is a great resource for that. And it explores this concept of originals, or people who have challenged the status quo over history. It talks about everybody from Da Vinci to Martin Luther King Jr. and kind of how they developed to be something truly unique. And it has very practical advice where they are just like you and me. They didn't have some incredible gift, but yet they still drove out some of the most radical innovation and change that we've ever seen. Grant has spent his life as an organizational psychologist, meaning that he studies what exactly makes people successful. And not only does he study what makes them successful, and his goal for this is to teach people who want to be those great creatives, such as the Martin Luther Kings of the world, how to think and act in a way that is similar to them. There's a lot of research, a lot of case studies, and ultimately it all boils down into how you need to think about your activities if you want to be someone who creates original work, and also the risks associated with that. There's a lot of really good concepts in here about how you can take on risk, but it's risk with caution, almost taking on intelligent risk, where if you want to be riskier in one part of your life, you need to dial back another part of your life to be a little more conservative so that you can handle it. And I think that is very practical advice. It's not the you must grind all the time and you have to be this different mentality person, you have to be unlike everyone else. I think that is unrealistic. It kind of alienates you, and this book is a lot more practical on how to actually create original work and be your own person as an individual. This book, similar to The Magic of Thinking Big, also touches on the self-doubt and fears aspect as being the largest thing that holds people back from achieving what they want to achieve. But there is practical advice of how to potentially reframe the things like anxiety and fear into more positive and constructive emotions. It also touches on the concept of failure as being a really good thing for somebody who wants to create something. The more you fail, the more experience you have on what you do. He does a great job of giving examples of these people who we think of as creatives and visionaries throughout history, as they were actually very normal people who just took a lot of chances on one specific thing. For Martin Luther King, he had been speaking for nearly 10 years before giving his I Have a Dream speech. People from the likes of Mozart and Da Vinci did thousands and thousands of artwork pieces before they finally found something that was a true hit. And they often weren't regarded as hits until later on in their lives anyway, when they thought it was the exact same as every other piece of work. The book also touches on that the environment you surround yourself with, you want it to be people who are good for your success and are not harming it and who do not strike down originality, which I think is something that people really can struggle with. Ultimately, Originals is a guide to how to, like most of these books, simply reframe the way you think, that it's more constructive for your success. You know, these books are not giving you like a secret that's out there. It is simply trying to reframe how you think and what you do and to be more positive lights. And it doesn't get on the side of toxic positivity, in my opinion. While these books do say to focus on the positive, it does definitely recognize that it's difficult. It's extremely difficult to do something that's unorthodox. But Grant does provide some actionable strategies that I've tried to start implementing. I only finished this book a couple weeks ago, so I'm still trying to work through everything he said. I might read it even a second time because of how much I liked it. Ultimately, this book says to embrace being a nonconformist, embrace originality, and pursue your ideas with resilience. I think it's worth reading on the sole fact that it proves that you don't have to be naturally above average in this one area to get good at it. Anyone can be successful, and ultimately it comes down to consistency. And that's a theme in a lot of these books. It's these small actions over time and how you frame things that really will decide where you end up and how happy you are with your own life, which I think was my goal coming into trying to get these self-improvement books read. And a lot of them just simply do not do that. These ones, luckily, I have really liked, and I think they are well-rounded and they are not on the extreme side. Self-help books ultimately should be a guide and a tool. They should not be gospel. I feel like too often the people I talk to that are reading these books try and find them as a miracle cure, and there is no miracle cure. It takes time. And I also really want to point out, if you're still here, you're clearly interested in reading these books, but all the books in the world do not matter without you taking action, which is why this list is only 4 books and not 17 or 25 or whatever everyone else is doing. I think they're simply giving you too much information because you can only consume so much information before you have to start doing. So a couple books to reframe how you think is great, but action will absolutely create more massive change than any single line you read in a book. And while that line in a book may spur you to change, that's where the real growth is going to happen, when you are actually taking actions toward what you want to do and who you want to be. Change happens in the moment, and you don't need these authors to give you an overcomplicated topic to unlock the secret. Which is why all the books I recommend are purely aids in developing the skills of how to think and not what to think. I hope that distinction is clear. But I am interested to know what books you guys are reading right now, so let me know in the comments what you're reading, or if you've read any of these books, also let me know what you think. If you want a direct link to any of the books mentioned in this video, then you can find that in the description. Consider giving this video a like if you found it useful. I'm just trying to give you my honest information. Consider subscribing if you want to hear more from me. You can watch this video here if you feel like it. That's all I've got for you guys. Thank you.